Okay, we are now going live on YouTube. So, let me share my screen now. And I'm going to let everybody in, okay?
Sounds good.
Oops, sorry. Great. I think we are live on YouTube now. So, Ellen, you can still hear me, right?
I can hear you.
Excellent. All right. Things are great for us now. Okay.
Excellent.
All right. So, we're going to get started in just a minute. It looks like the numbers are still going up.
Welcome, everybody, so far. Hang in there with us for a little bit longer. We're just letting people in.
And I just want to quickly, for those of you who are already on, I just want to quickly mention, if you want, you're welcome to unmute. And throughout, we usually do recommend that if you have a question, to just go ahead and put it into the chat. So you may know, those of you who are familiar with Zoom, there's a chat feature. And if you have a question for Dr. Prager, you can just go ahead and put it right into the chat. And at toward the end, or if you want, if you really want, and if you have something really important to say, you can go ahead and unmute yourself in the middle of the talk. That's okay. But if at the end, if we have some time, hopefully we'll be able to answer some questions, and we'll go through the chat and we'll read them off to Dr. Prager, and then hopefully she can get your questions answered.
Yeah, if you have questions you want to ask them at the end, we can do that too. There should be plenty of time.
Okay, so that was another big batch of 7 people. So I am just going to go ahead and suggest we get started.
Sure.
All right. My name is Barnes. I'm one of the folks from Tumble Home Learning and Tumble Home Books. We are the publishers of Dr. Prager's books. The book that we're going to be talking about today on today's Tumbleocity is Escape Greenland, which we're very excited about. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Dr. Prager. I don't want to go too far into her bio. I encourage you all to visit our website, tumblehomebooks.org, where there's a larger bio about her and her work. But let me tell you, she's like a superhero, okay? That's all you need to know. She's our #1 most important adventure scientist / author / everything else. So she's a marine scientist and author. She's widely recognized for her expertise and her ability to make science entertaining and understandable for people of all ages, especially your age. She's an advisor to Celebrity Cruises in the Galapagos Islands, which she has another book with us called about the Galapagos, which I encourage you at the end. I'll pop up the book on the screen and encourage you to visit the website and see that book as well. And she was previously the chief scientist for the Aquarius Reef Base in Florida, which is actually the world's only undersea research station. And she was also an assistant dean at the University of Miami in their Division of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences. So with that, I will let her take it away and introduce today's Tumbleocity. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Barnes. Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so excited to talk about this book and the place where it's about and a little bit about the adventure story and how I came up with it. So it's kind of one of my favorite places. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen because I put together some really great photographs and so I can tell you sort of about the story and what happened. So hang on for a second as more people come in and I share my screen here. We will get going. Okay. So everybody, I can see it. Ray, can you see it? Everybody say, yes, we can see it.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes, yes we can, Miss.
Excellent, excellent. So one of my favorite lines in the book is, holy giant iceberg. And I think you can see why. Look at that iceberg. It even has a hole in it. So as Barney said, the first book, this is a series. The first book in the series was Escape Galapagos. And the second book, it just came out, is Escape Greenland. And the whole idea behind the books is called the Wunderlist Adventures. And there's the Schuyler family. And the mother, Mrs. Schuyler, or it was Dr. Schuyler, she was a marine geologist. She had a list of all the places in the world. She was very adventurous and loved nature that she wanted to go. And so she called it her, she called it her Wonderlist. Unfortunately, she passed away, but to preserve her memory and to honor her life, the father, Dr. Schuyler, decides to take all of his two kids, Ezzy and Luke, to all the places on the Wonderlist. And the first one was Galapagos. Now, of course, every time they go on these trips, they sort of end up getting more adventure than they planned for. So Escape Galapagos was the first one, and Escape Greenland is the second one. And before I go on, I'm just going to read you a little bit, sort of a little summary of what the story is so you have an idea as we go. So Ezzy Schuyler, her brother Luke, and their father embark on a trip to number 2 on her deceased mother's Wonderlist, Greenland's Kanga Ice Fjord. While worrying that she didn't inherit her mother's gene for adventure, Ezzy and her family become embroiled in a dangerous plot, a flight across an obstacle course of icebergs, some hungry humpback whales, and a wild kayak ride atop a river inside a glacier will test Ezzy's bravery and lead to an astonishing discovery. So that kind of gives you a little idea. So why did I choose Greenland? So I'm going to tell you with Greenland and especially exactly where I chose as a setting for this book. It was number 2. And Barnes, I think there's some people waiting to get in. You might want to, can you see them?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm admitting people as we speak.
Excellent. So here's a great image from NASA of exactly where Greenland is on the planet. And specifically, we're going to go to a place called Ilulissat, which is, if you look and you can see the map over here. It's about halfway up, almost halfway up on the western side of Greenland. And we're going to look at, there's a glacier. That's the name in Greenlandish or Danish, in Greenlandish, but in Danish it's called the Jacobsen Glacier. And so to the right is the main ice sheet. Then there's a glacier, and then you get an ice shelf, which is a floating part of the glacier on ocean, which is in this fjord called the Kanga Ice Fjord. And Ilulissat is a little village up to the right above, just to the north of the Kanga Ice Fjord. And it is a very famous place. It's one of the fastest flowing rivers of ice or glaciers in the world. And scientists from all over the world go there to study the impacts of climate change on melting ice. And one of the things you can see is that the edge of the glacier, that each line you see with the date on it, that was the edge of the glacier, how it has moved inland over time because of climate change. And that's called retreat. And that's one of the big things scientists go here to study, is how the ice is melting. And there's all different processes. They think it's happening from temperature above the ice, ocean currents below, icebergs breaking off. And they go and they study some of these big drainage holes called moulins. So this is the place to go. It's also a place where in 2012, they showed a part of a movie. They showed this amazing event where a whole bunch of ice, calved off from it. And I'm going to try and show you that. Ooh, it's not, for some reason, it's not running. There it is. So turn your sound up a little bit.
I'm on the phone with Jim
from this
on one of our regular check-ins.
is astonishing.
Just nothing's happening.
Hey, Jim. It's going well. We had some serious bouts of wind. But
Nothing's
other than that,
happening.
Things are fairly well set up here. We've got some continuous time lapse going.
It's starting, Adam. I think. Adam, it's starting.
Oh wait, Jim, this is the big piece is starting to calve. Let me call you back.
Call him back. Okay, bye.
Still going?
Yeah, in that V section right there. Look at that big bird rolling. All four
Listen
right
to
there.
that sound.
Yeah. Look at that. You see how? Look at the whole thing.
Those are hundreds of feet tall chunks of ice breaking off the front of the glacier. You hear that noise? Oh my gosh. Can you imagine being there seeing this? And they had no idea it was going to happen. That's the underside of the ice coming up. Still going.
The calving face is 300, sometimes 400 feet tall. Pieces of ice were shooting up out of the ocean 600 feet and then falling. The only way that you can really try to put it into scale with human reference is if you imagine Manhattan. And all of a sudden, all of those buildings just start to rumble and quake and peel off and just fall over and roll around. This whole massive city just breaking apart in front of your eyes. We're just observers, these two little dots on the side of the mountain. And we watched and recorded the largest witness calving event ever caught on tape.
So how big was this calving event that we just looked at? We'll resort to some illustrations again to give you a sense of scale. It's as if the entire lower tip of Manhattan broke off, except that the thickness, the height of it, is equivalent to buildings that are 2.5 or 3 times higher than they are. That's a magical, miraculous, horrible, scary thing. I don't know that anybody's really seen the miracle and horror of that. It took 100 years for it to retreat 8 miles from 1900 to 2000. From 2000 to 2010, it retreated 9 miles. So in 10 years, it retreated more than it had in the previous 100.
So you can imagine, I was looking at climate change and ice melting for another book called Dangerous Earth that I wrote. I thought, where should I go? Where could I see this firsthand? And so somebody said to me, you should go to Ilulissat, Greenland. And that's actually where that was also filmed. So how do you get to Greenland? Here's what I did is I live in St. Petersburg, Florida. So I flew from St. Petersburg up to Boston. Then I flew to Iceland. And then I flew across Greenland to Ilulissat to see what it was all about. And then it turned out it was so amazing, I used it for the book. So I actually integrated a lot of what I saw on that trip into the story. And so there's a place in the beginning of the book where they're in a plane going to Ilulissat, and they're flying over, and Luke looks out the window and he looks down and he's like, what is that down there? It looks like fudge striped ice cream. And here's a picture looking out of the airplane flying over Greenland, and look, that's the glacier. And it really did look like fudge striped ice cream. And then you fly over the ice sheet, and then you head into Ilulissat. And here is landing. It's kind of a short landing strip, and there were very low clouds, and so I couldn't see anything around it. And so the characters do the same thing in the story. They land, and they don't know what it looks like. And it's a very short landing strip, and that's kind of scary, but they make it. And then they start to go and they explore the town of Ilulissat. And here's what the town looks like. This is what Greenland looks like. And you can see there's a beautiful church, and they've got these beautiful rocks and inlets out to a place. That inlet ends out into a place called Disco Bay. And there's places like this. This is actually a hotel that I stayed in. And one of the best things in my mind, and this is one of my favorite parts of the book, is that when you're in the hotel, you go out to those back windows that are overlooking the ocean, and all of a sudden you see an iceberg floating by the town. And that's where the line, holy giant iceberg, comes up. And it's really cool because you actually can't tell they're moving. And so what you have to do is you have to look at the edge of the iceberg, and next to some specific point that's a reference point that's not moving. And if you watch for a minute or two, all of a sudden you'll see that the iceberg's very, very slowly not moving by. But how many places in the world can you be sitting on land in your hotel room or on shore and watch as icebergs float by? And so this was one of the reasons why I decided this had to be number 2 on the Wonderlist. One of the other things they have that are in the book are Greenland dogs. Now, one of the things I learned when I was there that I didn't know, there's no other type of dog in Greenland. The only dogs you find there are called Greenland dogs, and that's what they're here. That's what you see. And that's because they don't allow any other breeds into the island, because if they mixed, they would lose the Greenland. They're afraid they'd lose the Greenland dog, and they're very important for their culture. They pull the sleds and go hunting with them. So it's a very important part of the culture of Greenland. The other thing about these dogs is they have this very eerie howl. At some point during the day, probably around feeding time, all of a sudden one dog will start howling. And then from all around the island, you'll hear the rest of them howl. And maybe later, if you have time, you should go online and Google Greenland dogs howling, because it's this really eerie sound. And in the book, Ezzy, the main character, she's a little fearful of wild animals. She's trying to get over her fear, but when she gets into the hotel, she starts hearing all this howling, and she's like, are there wolves in Greenland? Are there a lot of wolves in Greenland? So she learns about Greenland dogs. One of the things I personally love as a scientist is I love maps. And so I'm so thankful to the publisher, Tumbleocity, that in every book we have maps. And so here is Tammy Yee's illustrator, and here's her illustration of the map of that Kanga Ice Fjord and the glacier and Ilulissat, and there's a little map of the town. And so one of the great things that you can do that our characters are also going to do is you can hike from the town of Ilulissat out to the ice fjord. And so I'm going to take you on a little hike. And the characters do the same thing in the story. So from the town, you can hike through the little village of Ilulissat off the main roads, and then you come to sort of these ridges made of these gray rocks and some grassy areas, and you hike out towards the fjord, and you start to see some ice, and you start to see it. And this is what the hiking looks like. There are some mushy spots where the permafrost is thawing, the frozen ground is starting to thaw, but that's what it looks like. And that's kind of cool, but it's not that astonishing, except when you come over one last ridge, and this is what you see. Look at the bottom of the screen and see the red arrow? That's the scale of hikers. Those are people hiking. And so now you see how big those icebergs are. So an ice fjord is a narrow rocky valley filled with ocean, topped with ice. And so I came over this ridge, and I probably was just like my characters in the book. My mouth was hanging open. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. All shapes and sizes of icebergs, all mashed in together in the ice fjord. Wow, it was really cool. And what if you got trapped out there and had to find your way across the icebergs? That might be kind of scary. Maybe it happens. So why do you get all those icebergs? So we saw what happens at the glacier. You remember it calves off and it forms those icebergs. They float down the Kanga Ice Fjord, and then they come out through the mouth of the fjord, which is down on the left, and they float out into the ocean. But there's something very special about this fjord. At the mouth, at the end of the fjord, the depth, it starts at 1,000 feet, and all of a sudden it comes up to only 200 feet. And icebergs floating down get stuck. They get stranded on a rocky ridge. And because those icebergs get stuck, they cause a traffic jam in the fjord behind it. And that's why it's all filled with ice. And so when you see out in the ocean, the icebergs that actually get out of the fjord, they're floating around, and they are all sorts of crazy shapes. Look at this one. This one kind of, to me, looks like a fantastical Dr. Seuss iceberg. Do you think maybe a boat could go under that one? Look at that. It's just a crazy shape. This is at the mouth of the fjord. That's a big iceberg that's actually stuck on the ridge. It can't go anywhere. And behind it, you get all sorts of icebergs. Look at this. This is looking right at those big icebergs that are stuck at the mouth. They can't go anywhere until they melt enough and they can rise up and flow off. But look behind those icebergs. This is what's happening. See how it's all mashed together? And imagine, gosh, what would happen if I had to cross that because there was somebody maybe chasing me and I had to get across the ice fjord? Wow, that could be kind of tough. Here's some more at the edges of the fjord. Sometimes you get areas of open water, and that's ocean water. And look how clear you can see through the water. You can see the ice below. And sometimes you get these really strange shapes. You see all sorts of icebergs. Look at this, looks like a kind of like a mushroom shape right there. You can see all sorts of shapes in there. And other strange things. This iceberg in the book, the young Luke says, oh my, he basically says, it looks like it's bleeding. And Ezzy says, yeah, brown blood, that's kind of creepy. And it is kind of creepy, but what's happening here is as the glacier flows over the land, it picks up sediment and rocks and dirt, and they get trapped in the icebergs. And that very dark material it absorbs the sun, the heat from the sun faster than the white ice, and it melts. And as it melts, the dirt and sediment in the water, in the meltwater, runs down the icebergs, and it looks like it's bleeding. So you see really weird things. Then sometimes what happens in the icebergs, they actually tip all the way over, and you get to see what the bottom of an iceberg looks like. And that's on the right-hand side. That blue ice is ice that has been under the ice for a long time. and the air has been squeezed out of it. Icebergs that are white have air in them. If the air's been squeezed out by the weight over top, it looks blue. And then you can also see some brown ice that has dirt in it there too. If you're really lucky and a Lulusat, you can go kayaking around icebergs. You don't want to get too close because they could tip over or they could break apart, but you can go kayaking, and you have to put on, when you go, this is kind of fun, you have to put on long underwear and then what's called a dry suit because the water is really cold and the last thing you want to do is fall in. So maybe I had to do something with that in the book too. And when I was out kayaking, the guide, if you look on the right-hand side on this picture, see how that ice is clear? That is iceberg water that has melted and refrozen, and it's fresh water. And what the guy did is he took a little knife and he chiseled off some shards and put them in glasses for us, and we drank the water, and it was wonderfully fresh ice. And so in the book, I use that. There's a time when Ezzy and Luke are on a whale watching tour, and they get to do the same thing. But imagine if you could kayak not only in the ocean, but what if you could kayak into one of these strange moulins? That could be quite an adventure. So these are big giant holes that form in the glaciers, and that's how the water drains off the glacier under the ice. Now, when I wrote the book, there's a scene in the book where scientists are studying how the glacier's melting, and they're studying these moulins, and they dump some green dye into the water to trace where it goes. Well, I kind of made that part up, and then I found this picture of scientists dyeing the water red, letting it drain into the moulin to try and trace where it goes. Well, they never refound the red water, but it was a cool idea, and I was so excited because I put that in the book too. And here's some pictures from a colleague of mine who actually rappels down ropes into the moulins to put instruments and sensors, equipment down in there to study what's happening. And can you imagine in a rope going down what it would look like underneath? There might be under ice caverns. So I was just so fascinated with these moulins that I had to put those in the story too. And of course, in Greenland, there are whales. Here are some fantastic pictures of humpback whales. You see them spouting. So they're clearing their blowholes right there in front of that iceberg. And to the right is a drone picture. And one of the ways that we identify humpbacks is you see those white flippers? That's a clear indication that it's a humpback. So there's two humpback whales. Here's another great picture of a humpback whale diving in Greenland near an iceberg. And look at the underside of its tail. See how there's a pattern of white and black? Turns out every whale has an individual pattern under their tail. And so you can use them like fingerprints on people to identify the whales. And so in the story, they go out whale watching and they find some whales that scientists have identified. Can you imagine what the tail would look like if they identified the whale as Oreo or double stuff? So they have all sorts of fun names for the whales. And humpback whales have a very special way of feeding called bubble net feeding, where in a pond underwater, they blow air out of their blowhole and the air rises to the surface like a net of bubbles, and it corrals fish and tiny zooplankton creatures. And then the whales come up under it and take up big gulps of water and fish. Look at all the fish in that whale's mouth. And so there's a scene in the book, which turned out to be the scene for the cover, where Ezzy and Luke are in a boat and whales start coming up all around them. And look at the cover, maybe right under the boat. But look how great the artist did about the whales and bubble net feeding. So it's real. That's where that's the scene in the story that comes from. Now, personally, one of my favorite sections in all of these books, same is true in Galapagos, is in the back. There's a section called Real versus Made Up, where I have a list of things that I want you as the reader to try and figure out whether it's based on real science or I made it up. And I'm just going to read a couple to you. There's answers are in the book too, but I'm going to read a couple. I think you'll know because I told you this one. The Jacobsen Glacier is one of the fastest flowing rivers of ice in the world. I gave you that one, so that's true. But how about this one? The iceberg that sank the Titanic came from the Kanga Ice Fjord. Okay, let's see hands. How many of you think that's true? Raise your hand. How many of you think I made it up? Raise your hand. It's true. Scientists think that the iceberg that sank the Titanic came out of this ice fjord and drifted for a long time and finally drifted south. And it was the one that sank the Titanic. Okay, how about this one? Where the icebergs are big enough and flat, you can go hiking across them. How many of you think that's real? Raise your hand. How many of you think I made that up? Oh, you guys are pretty good. I made that up because the icebergs are pretty unstable. Some of them, they break. You never know when they're going to break apart. Every time you're out watching the fjord, you hear them cracking and falling. Some of them flip over. So it would be pretty darn dangerous to do that, but it makes for a good story. Okay, we'll do one more. How about, let's see. During the summer months, they put all-terrain wheels on the dog sleds for tourist rides. How many think that's real? How many think I made that up? I made that up. You're right if you said that. So with that, there's a lot more of the real versus made up in the back of the book, and I think they're pretty fun. But with that, I want to make sure we have plenty of times for questions and to talk. But if you want to learn more about the book or me, you can go to tumblehomebooks.org. You can order it through your favorite bookstore. You can go to Tumblehome. I know there's somebody on here, Louise, who helped me with some educational activities about climate change. And we have a place at the website where you can go and look at any educators out there at these wonderful educational activities on climate change. And you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram and on Twitter. And I love to post pictures and I love to get comments from my readers on tweets. So with that, I think, let's see if we can answer some questions or comments from all of you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see you guys. And we will take it from there. So questions. You get any questions, Barnes?
I got one question that asked about how the Greenland dogs are related to Siberian Huskies, or are they Huskies?
Oh, I don't know if they're related. I would imagine somewhere back in their lineage, they are related, but they really try and keep them separate now. So they're really, really neat.
Well, we got a couple more questions coming in. One was, do you plan to do another Tristan Hunt book? Wonderlist? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so my previous series was called The Tristan Hunt and the Sea Guardians. Right now, there are 3 books out. Right now, we don't have a 4th book planned, but never say never. If the publisher decides they want to, I would love to. I love those series. And with regard to Ezzy and Luke's adventures in the Wonderlist, yes, we do plan for a book, and I already have some ideas where it's going to be. I've kind of got started writing a little bit, and I will tell you because of the pandemic, I couldn't travel to where I wanted to go to do research for it. So I'm using a place where I've spent a lot of time in my past. And so if you look up some of the things I've done, you might be able to figure out where the 3rd book is going to take place.
There's a big hint right there. Okay, we have a question about, did you see any narwhals or bowhead whales there?
Oh, I didn't. I didn't see any narwhal or bowhead whales or any minke whales. They have a lot of minke whales unfortunately. I did see there are also seals there. I did see a couple seals, so, but no other whales. I would have loved to have seen them.
And another question we have is, what is the coldest temperature there?
Oh, well, during the winter, it's very cold. I don't know how cold it gets because I wasn't going to go in the winter. I went there in the summer, and I would say during the day, it was actually a really 60s, 70s Fahrenheit, unless you got close to the ice and there was a wind, and the wind blowing over the ice dropped the temperature dramatically, and then you'd have to bundle up. And so there were times when it was probably in the 30s, 40s. But in the winter, obviously, it gets much colder than that. The other really interesting thing is that even in the summer, the sun never sets. And so at midnight, the sun's not high, but it hasn't set, and it's kind of a dim light. And so there's a little play on that. And, we want to get up and go hiking at midnight because it's still light out. But you could really, like out hiking, you can tell when the sun goes down, there's a real drop in the temperature. But it sure was beautiful. I was there in, I think, July or August, and it was spectacular.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
How many days were you there?
So I was there for about 5 or 6 days, and I went hiking 2 or 3 times. I couldn't get enough of the Kanga Ice Fjord. I kept hiking out there. I did that like 3 or 4 times. I went kayaking. I went and got in a boat, and I got a tour up. I went north of Ilulissat and got to see another glacier, and I got to watch the front of the glacier falling off a little bit. So that was really cool. So I spent about 5 or 6 days, and then I spent about four more days in Iceland on my way back. So it was a really cool trip.
And I have one more thing. Are you gonna plan to make a escape something with Africa?
Ooh, that sounds like a fantastic idea. Once I can start traveling again, I would love to do an escape Africa.
Okay.
I can't say we're going to do it, but I would like to.
And relating to Iceland, we have a question from actually another author, another Tumblehome author whose book has not yet come out.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. Her question is, does Greenland have volcanoes like Iceland?
No. There may be ancient volcanoes, but no, Iceland has volcanoes for 2 reasons. One, it sits right on the mid-ocean ridge, which is the plates are 2 tectonic plates are being pulled apart essentially, and magma's coming up. Also, it is one of the world's hotspots, just like Hawaii, where for some reason, which scientists don't know why, deep in the earth underneath Iceland, there's a hot plume of magma coming up towards the surface. And we don't know why, but so Iceland has volcanoes for 2 reasons. But Greenland, no. In fact, there's a whole thing about why is Greenland called Greenland when it's mostly ice, and Iceland is mostly green except for a few glaciers. That should really be Greenland.
Well, we do have someone raising their hand. Is it Leoka? If you want to unmute, you could. Your hand has been raised for a while. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm a science teacher in middle school, and some of the kids have asked me, because they know I was going to participate, to ask you specifically about the colors of the ice. Now, I know I came in a little bit late, but what did you say the blue color?
Okay. Oh, that's a terrific question. I love the colors of the ice. So the white ice has air in it. If the ice melts and refreezes, or it's sitting on the bottom of a lot of ice on top of it, and all the weight is compressing it and it squeezes out the air, that's how it gets blue. So the blue ice does not have air in it. And of course, the brown ice has sediment in it, or dirt or rock. So those are the main colors. Sometimes it can look greenish if there's algae in the ice, or it's reflecting. One of the things I saw, it looked green. A lot of times the water was a little greenish, and the sunlight would reflect off the water and make the ice look green.
That's
But
really,
the main colors are the white, the blue, the brown, and then sometimes greenish.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, sure. Great
Right,
question.
Miss. All right, Miss. About the ice. When it breaks apart, does it disappear quickly?
Oh, that's a great question. Sometimes it can stick around for years. If it's a big enough iceberg and it drifts out, it can take years to melt. If it breaks off and it's just a little piece, it might melt much faster than that. It could melt in a day or even a couple hours. So it kind of depends on how big the piece is, right? How fast it's flowing out, how warm it is around it, and how warm the water is all around it. But the big icebergs take a long time to melt. And that's why sometimes when they get stuck on the mouth of the Kanga Ice Fjord and you get that big traffic jam, it lasts for a long time, and only every once in a while an iceberg gets let out. That's a cool question.
Wow,
Cool,
thanks.
get it? Cool.
Yep.
Question.
Very
Yep.
cool.
Good
Very
one.
cool.
Also, good afternoon, Miss. And also, that plan was good.
So we have actually a bunch more questions. I'll try to go in order.
Okay.
One is, how many whales were around you?
So I only saw a couple whales, but you can have a whole pond when they're bubble net feeding. So you can have 10 or 15. When I saw whales, we only saw a couple at a time.
It's easy to make a new one, see?
And then there's a few questions about animals. So what other animal species live there that you know?
Well, they actually have reindeer. There are some birds there, like terns, and there's some seagull species. There are seals. There's a lot of fish, like halibut. There's a lot of different kinds of fish. They have fox. They have something called a musk ox. They have, let's see what other animals are there. So and it also depends on what part of Greenland you're in, but those are the main. There aren't a lot. The other, you know what else they don't have? They don't have a ton of animals there because the conditions are pretty rough, right? That's pretty rough living. There's no trees. Think about those pictures I showed you. There are no trees. So it's a pretty hard place, a pretty harsh place to live.
So they live with ice.
And then we have a few other just curiosity. It looks like they're curious about what animals you were most interested in and why.
So my background is I'm a marine scientist. And so I was very interested in the whales and the seals. But interestingly enough, my background is also geology. And they have some very old, cool rocks there. I didn't show you too much, but they have rocks they're kind of folded in layers like this with pink and black stripes. And they're some of the oldest rocks on the planet. So I was interested in a lot of the marine life, like the seals and the whales and what fish they had there, but I kind of like the rocks. Although I will say on this trip, I have to probably admit, I was more fascinated by the icebergs because I had never seen those icebergs like that before. But they were all together make it such a special place.
Could you show us, can you show us a picture of the rock, or do you not have it?
I don't have it right here with me, but if you Google afterwards, 2 things to Google: Greenland dogs howling, because you guys have to hear it because it's so cool, and do Greenland rocks, and I bet you'll see them.
Great. Are there any other questions? It looks like I sort of, when I saw the animal questions, they all seem to be, there were a couple of questions that came in about the same, like what animals did you see there?
Right.
Which ones were you interested in? So people
Well,
really love their animals.
Yeah, well, and the Greenland dogs, there are a lot about the Greenland dogs are in there, and I thought that was really interesting that they literally, you cannot bring any other kind of dog into Greenland because they don't want to mix the breed. They don't want to lose that pure Greenland dog. And their howling and stuff was really interesting. And what do you think they feed them? I think they feed them fish. They eat big chunks of fish. Anything else?
I thought cats like fish.
Cats like fish too, but dogs that grew up in Greenland area that, if you went out, used them to go out hunting seals and things, and they fed them, that's what they feed them. One of the things I talk about in the book is that everything is really expensive in Greenland and it's hard to get things there. And so they eat some things that we don't necessarily eat. And, like seals, whatever, which, I don't want to kill a seal, but I understand.
Gross.
It does sound gross. And they're doing it less and less because they can bring in more food now, but it's part of the way they survived. Other questions?
Oh, are there turtles there?
I don't think there are any turtles there. Nope. It's a hard place to get to for animals, and it's a hard place to live. It's a hard place for people to live. It's pretty harsh.
Is there Wi-Fi there?
There is Wi-Fi, not everywhere.
Good.
There's Wi-Fi in some places, but not everywhere. When I was out hiking, and this actually comes out in the story, you're out hiking, and they're actually in the story, there's a sign, they go hiking, and there's a sign that says, make sure you wear the right clothes, you have the right food, there won't be any communications, there's, bring water, and watch out for big mosquitoes. That's all true. There is a sign that basically says, once you go out hiking, you have to have everything and your communication services won't work. So you have to be prepared. There wasn't a sign about big mosquitoes, but they were big mosquitoes. That was one of the animals that I didn't really like very much.
Who likes mosquitoes?
Yeah, that's a good question. Not many people. Any other questions? Icebergs? Climate change?
Does climate change melt icebergs?
It does, because climate change means
heat.
That the earth is warming, not just the air, but also the ocean. It's melting these icebergs and the glaciers faster. And for the ice that's up on land, when that ice melts, it actually causes sea level to rise. And so that's something that people are very worried about.
So is it going to flood soon?
Well, it's flooding a couple places. Oh, look, I think we have another question.
We do, yeah. How big are the mosquitoes?
How big are the mosquitoes? Well, they're big for mosquitoes, but there are a lot of them. Some people actually hike in net hats that have nets on them. Oh, I see a hand up also.
Yeah. Feel free to unmute.
Is that Fo? You see that?
Excuse me.
Yeah?
I have a question. Do you know anything about what kind of fish there are and what do they do?
Well, there are. It's actually fishing is a very big industry in Greenland. They have halibut. I'm trying to think of what the other fish they have. I can't remember. Some I don't know. They I don't know if they have salmon. Halibut's a big one. I think they have other kinds of cold water species that like cold water. And it's a very big business. And it's also something they're worried about how climate change is going to change the fish. And that's also why one of the things that happens is when the ice melts, it releases nutrients and it causes the food web to be very rich there. And so you get little fish, and then you get big fish eating that, and then you get seals, and then you get the whales eating the fish, and you get birds. That's why it's so rich in life, because of the nutrients that the icebergs actually bring into the water.
And Marcel, who I believe just asked that last question, is just put a little notice up saying they're from Kent, England. So that's pretty far away. Thanks for joining us.
That is far away. Wow.
It's actually 10:50 now.
Oh my gosh. Well,
PM.
wow. Well, thank you for staying up. That's so fun. And I see there's a little girl in pink who has had her hand up.
Yep, they're not muted right now.
Do you have a question?
How big are some of the icebergs that usually break away?
Oh my gosh. So you can have icebergs that are tiny. They're like this little bit. They call them bits or bergs. Or you can have icebergs that are hundreds of feet tall, bigger than any skyscraper you've ever seen. And one of the things that picture I showed you of that valley with all those icebergs mashed in together, one of the cool things is that there's all sizes, shapes and sizes that you see of those icebergs together. And so their shapes, I saw some that look like mushrooms. I saw some they had big holes in them. I saw some that had arches, and so it was really cool. Sometimes they look like animals. Yep, all shapes and sizes.
So does that mean, so have you seen, so is there one iceberg that looks the same? So there's not one iceberg that ever looked the same?
Nope. Every single iceberg is different. And that's part of the fun, is that you never knew what they were going to look like.
And can people use things with icebergs? Like what can they do with them?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So when ice freezes in the ocean, when the water freezes to become an iceberg, the salt in the ocean, most of it stays in the ocean, and the water that freezes is much fresher. So there are some people that would like to tow the icebergs away and use it for fresh water. But, think about that, would be pretty hard to do. I know that would be pretty hard to do, but there are some people who think you might be able to do that, is use icebergs for fresh water.
Well, if they are fresh and don't have salt in them, well, that's pretty cool. If it's from the ocean and it doesn't have any salt in it, that's actually pretty cool. But I'm sure you could do that. It's harder to move it.
It's very hard to move it. That's right. And
you probably have to have a big boat.
Yeah, and then what would happen if you paid all that money for an iceberg and it broke up while you were towing it? That would be bad.
You wouldn't get your money.
You are right. That could be a problem. But I remember I showed you the picture of kayaking. Even when you go on an iceberg tour, like they take you out on a boat, they don't let you get too close because they're afraid if an iceberg breaks apart or rolls over, it could create a big wave that could knock you over. And so even when you're out there, like when we were kayaking, they wouldn't let us go too close because they were afraid that it would be unsafe, because it's like you really want to go close, but they don't really let you do that.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I hope I'm not interrupting. I have a question. Do you think it's dangerous in Greenland, or do you think it's safe? Because as you know, there's a lot of orcas there, and they can just come onto the boat to swallow you.
Well, it turns out with regard to orcas, or killer whales for some of you, killer whales orcas have never attacked a human. There's never been anybody attacked by humans. Orcas are extremely smart, and they are like one of the top predators in the ocean, and they don't go after humans. One of the things I always say about, same with sharks, humans are terrible food for things like orcas and sharks, and they don't attack you. I felt very safe in Greenland. I was not scared at all of whales, of the icebergs. You have to be safe, but it was great.
But there is the Greenland shark, which is highly dangerous.
No, well, first, they are not highly dangerous, and they live very deep in the ocean most of the time, and they're like zombies. We think they're very sluggish sharks, and they're big. You're right in that they're very big sharks, and they live very long, but nobody's ever been attacked by a Greenland shark, and they only come up close to the surface in the dead of winter. Most of the time they stay down really deep because they like where it's cold. So you don't have to worry. Don't worry about Greenland sharks. You're good. You're all good with Greenland sharks.
So does that mean we don't taste good?
We don't. We're all bony. We don't have a lot of blubber or oil. We're skin and bones. Most
I'm not
times,
skin and bones.
most times. Okay, there's some blood in there too. Most times with sharks, it's a mistake. They bite somebody by mistake because they can't see them or they've been threatened. And when they taste them, that's how they taste when they bite. They say, "Ugh, we don't want this." And they spit them out. So it's a mistake typically when that happens. So not something to worry about. I think, Fo, do you have a question, the pink? Yes? What's your question? Go ahead.
I've been reading so long, I'm trying to forget.
You remember?
I'll try to remember.
Okay.
Right. While you're thinking about it, I'll ask another one that was in the chat, which is, how do glaciers start?
Oh, how do glaciers start? Glaciers start as snowfall. So snow, lots of snow falls and falls and falls. And then over time, it compacts, it compresses, it gets down like that, and it turns into ice. And what happens is it's going from a place that's high to somewhere low. So it's like, you know how water runs from a place that's high and it runs to where it's low? Same thing happens with the glacier. It's snow, you get snow after snow, you get these layers of snow that turn into ice. And then, just like a river, but much slower, the ice flows pretty slowly most of the time down to a lower area, often towards the coast. So it starts with snow. Okay, Fo, did you remember your question? You did? Okay.
How deep is the snow?
How what?
How deep is the snow usually?
Oh my gosh, to form a glacier, it can be hundreds and hundreds of feet, or if you're in England, maybe meters. It can be really deep. Buildings and buildings and houses tall.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I have a theory. Do you
Okay.
think animals which were thought to be extinct are actually in places where humans haven't been?
Oh my gosh, what a good question. Well, I'm not sure if I think some that extinct, maybe. I think there are species that have yet to be discovered because, especially in the ocean, there's so much of the ocean that we actually haven't explored. So there are definitely species that we haven't seen yet. Some species that are extinct, maybe, but certainly not anything like megalodon or something really big. That I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. I think we would have seen it if it was, or we would have seen evidence, scientific evidence of it. So probably not.
Because not long ago in England there was a bug which was thought to be extinct but was actually found.
Yep, I believe that. I think you're right. I think there are probably more things like that, especially small things, right? That might be living somewhere where we don't go a lot. But I think there's some that maybe, but also I think there's a lot that are new. Oh, yep. Phoebe, do you have another question?
How big are the beluga whales?
How big are beluga whales? Well, they can range in size from, they can start out kind of small, like 10 feet, but they can be like 20 feet or bigger. Yep. And they are really smart whales. And you know what else is really funny about beluga whales? They have loose vertebrae and they can turn their head almost all the way around. And you know how whales can echolocate? You can use sound. Because the belugas can change the shape of their forehead, they can send their sound out and target where they want much better than other animals, whales, or even dolphins. Belugas are very special.
Thanks.
Sure. So Barness, I think, is there anything last in the chat? Because I think we're just about up to time.
Right. It's just about time. So unless somebody has an urgent question that they just can't wait, and you have a few seconds to pop it in there if you do. Otherwise, I just want to thank everybody for showing up today. We all want to give Dr. Prager a big round of applause. Thank you this was a wonderful talk today. Thank you so much for being here today. And
Excuse me.
something quick, please.
Do you think there are huge marine trenches in those locations?
We know there are. Yes, indeed. There are definitely deep marine trenches, and we know where they are. We know how they form, which is for another time.
Great.
You are full of
Thank
questions,
you.
Marcel. That is excellent. Thank you so much.
And again, if you're interested in Dr. Prager's book, I'm going to put another link to the activities page and the front of our website, and her book is right in the front of our website, right out on top, so you can't miss it. If you click right on it, you can see info about that book and also the Galapagos book as well.
Thank you so much for this meeting. It was amazing.
Oh, thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.
And again,
Thank
coupon
you.
code EG25 will get you a discount on the book. Thank you all.
Got it. Thank you for teaching us.
You're welcome. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Ellen Prager.
Bye.
You too, Bob.
And enjoy your breakfast.
Get a good sleep,
I'll see you
Marcel.
again.
Go to bed. Oh my gosh, too funny. That's great.
That was fantastic. Thanks.
Oh, thanks, Martha.
Got it at the end.
Oh, it was fun. I show them lots of great pictures of Greenland and Ilulissat, which is an
Bye.
amazing place.
I hope to see you on the next summit.
Wow.
Okay, thank you all.
All right,
I'm
bye,
going to,
everybody.
Bye.
bye-bye. I am going to take us off live YouTube right
Okay.
now.